moving forward and being faithful, like that is going to ultimately lead to even more fruit in the long term. Because like we're not looking just for flash, right? We're looking for fruit. And
Whoa.
you can't really develop fruit unless you're faithful. Like it takes time.
Yeah.
And, yeah, the long-term result of your obedience is going to totally be worth it.
Hey, welcome to the Ministry Mix podcast, where we're bringing you real conversations for the souls and strategies of ministry leaders. My name is Phil Gifford, and I'm joined by a couple people today. One is my co-host, Richard Pope.
Hello.
And we'll introduce our guest in just a second. But whether you are a seasoned pastor or ministry leader or just stepping into leadership for the first time, our goal for each episode is to share stories, insights, and practical tips to help you lead strategically while also caring for your soul. In each episode, we'll dive into topics that matter for your mission, your calling, and your own personal growth. Well, we're excited to have Josh on our interview today to kind of share his story, especially as it relates to God's calling on your life and the tenacity behind that. But this is really, Richard, you're going to drive this conversation. So why don't you introduce our friend?
Yeah. So on the call with us today is Josh, pastor of Cross and Anchor Church in Detroit, good friend of mine. I went out and visited Josh in August and got to preach at his church. And it was probably the coolest church I've ever preached at. Yeah. Right now, it's like in Detroit in an old factory, kind of gritty, super artistic. Like it was, I came back and we're in this beautiful building and I'm like, we need to break this thing and get a factory. Like I want a factory. But Josh shared his church planting story and it was encouraging to me. So yeah, Josh, you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your ministry?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. I know Richard. He and I have been a part of church planting, cohorts and stuff together. And he came out and preached. I just want to say this before I jump in, because I'm going to talk about like tenacity and resilience, but like we are on the show with like the definition of tenacity and resilience, which is Richard Pope. And he is such an inspiration, and he brought an amazing word to our church that I know inspired lots of people. But yeah, I don't know Phil as well, but I'm sure he's awesome.
He's okay.
I'm average in a lot of.
Well, yeah, a little bit of my background. I started Cross and Anchor with my wife in the beginning of 2019. Prior to that, I had been a pastor at a church in Montana for 8 years, church called Fresh Life Church. I had gone up there with a friend of mine who planted it, and it was an amazing journey to be a part of. And then my wife and I just really sensed that God was calling us to start a church, because I was a campus pastor at that church, and we really felt a pull toward a major city. And if you're familiar at all with any of Tim Keller's stuff, he's a big proponent of planting in major cities and the impact that can have on culture and et cetera, et cetera. So initially we were going to go to London, England, and that was the city that we felt like God was leading us to. And we started the process of like building a small team and fundraising, and we landed in Heathrow Airport in, I believe it was June of 2016. And that was the beginning of a bunch of surprises and things that didn't go how we anticipated them to. We ended up getting detained in the airport for about 36 hours and sent back to the U.S. And I can go more in depth to that story, but the nice way to say it is that we just ran into trouble with our visas, and we weren't planning on moving there at the time. We were just planning on starting the process of getting to know the city better. And the immigration thought we were trying to move there, and it was really hard to tell them we weren't. And so anyway, we got sent back to the U.S. Kind of with our tail between our legs, and like really disappointed, and having to deal with now telling donors and the team, like, hey, we got sent back to the US. And anyway, that was the beginning of a 2-year process where God ended up redirecting us somewhere that we had not even thought about to plant the church. And we learned in that journey. But yeah, the fast forward from then to when we planted Cross and Anchor, it was March of 2019. And now the church has been going for 6.5 years. And we're the coolest church around, according to Richard Pope. So
You are.
And Richard has a verified cool meter for sure.
for sure. For sure. What other pastor has a book of their poems published? I don't know.
That's true. I don't.
Maybe like I don't know who, but Richard is the guy. So he's very
Absolutely.
Stop flirting with me. What I love about your story, Josh, maybe I'm just unspiritual or more sinful than you. I feel like if I was supposed to be planting a church and I went somewhere and I got detained, I'd have quit. Like I would not have done it again somewhere else. So what was going through your head in that moment? You get detained, you're sent back. What are you like? What's that experience internally?
Yeah. Well, initially, like a lot of shock and a lot of disappointment. Like London really was our dream. Like planting a church there, living there. My wife and I had a little bit of history with the city. Like on our honeymoon, we had stopped over in London and prayed that that God would send church planters there. And we, at that point, weren't even thinking about that as a place to plant, but we just felt like there were all these things that indicated we were supposed to be there. And I remember, like, just as kind of a fun little story, I remember when we went to London, we were living in Montana at the time. We drove up to Calgary because those were like the cheapest flights. And our plane got delayed and they ended up transferring us to another airline. And it was like an upgrade. And then like our baggage was overweight and they were like, you know what? Don't even worry about it. It was like
all these signs.
Yeah. Like when does this kind of stuff happen? And so I remember like descending into London and seeing like the River Thames and like, the Shard and all these iconic, center London buildings. And then like, it felt like as we were descending, our hopes were just ascending. And then to get to the immigration line and like be detained with refugees and criminals and treated like we had lost all of our freedom. Like the whole experience was really discombobulating and disorienting. And then like, my even probably more shocked than me. And we had to call my father-in-law because we had already left, like moved. We didn't own anything anymore really. And we had to ask him if we could come to his place in Arizona and stay for a while. And as soon as she heard his voice, like she just started weeping. And then we were on a plane back to the US. They held our passports until we landed. Then they tried to make us pay for the plane tickets, which was like super sketch. So yeah, the whole thing was very shocking and disorienting.
So kind of like from that height of like, man, it seems like God's answering all our prayers, all this favor to like, it just the whiplash of calling there or of boundaries. When so you went about a 2-year process before ultimately where you are now in Detroit. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the ways that you press forward or started to pull back, like that 2-year gap.
Yeah. So just kind of like summarizing and giving like a 30,000-foot view.
Yeah.
In that 2-year process, we ended up living, I think, in like 5 or 6 different places. And up until then, I was 30. I'd only lived in 3 places my whole life. And so I felt like it was this, like, now that I look back on it, it was actually like a dark room season where God was developing me and my wife and our character and preparing us for what he had for us. And it was actually like a rapid development program. But at the time, it felt like we were almost in trouble, like, oh, God, what did we do wrong? But in that period of time, I remember I had a friend of mine who was a pastor in the Miami area, and we served at his church for about 6 months while we were trying to figure things out. There was a church planting network that heard of our story, and they actually wanted to help fund us to get us back to London. And so before we went and hung out with them, my friend in Miami brought us on his staff. And I remember one day I was just reading my regular Bible reading, and I read this passage in Corinthians where Paul says, "You fool, don't you know that what you sow doesn't come to life unless it dies?" And it was like one of those moments where it's only happened probably a handful of times in my life where like I just felt like the words were jumping off the page, like from God to me. And it felt like the first time God was saying like, hey, your dream is going to have to die so that something else can live.
Hmm.
And that was the beginning of kind of letting go of the dream of planting in London and being open to where God might send us elsewhere.
Hmm. Yeah, because it's hard when you feel like God is calling you someplace and like you've prayed about it, everything seems right, and then to have that shut so hard and like so quickly to like, I think maybe where's the wisdom? Maybe it's a good question to have a chat about. Is like, how do you know discerning like when to press in? And you've already mentioned this with Scripture as your guide, but like when to keep going? Like this is just a roadblock that God wants me there, and I'm going to keep pressing and keep pressing. And when do you pull back and say, "This is God's got something different for me," and I'm on my like I need to be aware of that. How do you guys draw the line on that in your own stories?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I know totally the answer to that question, but I can tell you how it worked for us. We didn't really feel a release of pursuing London for almost 2 years. So we actually in most of that 2 year time, we were still trying to get back there.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of that time, we went through this church planting residency with a group in Chicago. And the agreement was they were going to fund us for the first year to go to London. They were going to help us with connections to get everything worked out with our visas. And there were 3 different organizations that had agreed to help us get our visas. And then independently of each other, all of them backed out of helping us.
Okay.
And I remember sitting in the house that we were living in the suburbs of Chicago at the time. And like I was looking outside and there was like an eagle in our backyard, and it was just like sitting on the ground in the back of like this big field.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is so strange. Like I hardly ever see an eagle, let alone one that's just sitting there for like this long period of time. And all of a sudden, like I don't know how to explain it, but I just had this feeling from the Lord of like being released from pursuing that
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like, okay, it's time to go on to something else. And that same day, the church planning organization called us into the office and they were like, hey, have you thought about going somewhere else instead of London?
Hmm.
And I was like, funny enough, like, yes, just
This
now.
afternoon. Yeah.
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 And
Wow.
then Detroit came on our radar, and my brother who lived in upstate New York didn't even know we were thinking about Detroit. His job ended up transferring him to Detroit at the same time we were thinking about moving there. And all these things just started to fall into place. And so like up until that point, we were still like determined to try to get there. And I think like maybe that was God working that muscle of resilience in us. Because there have been so many times over the last 7 years here in Detroit where we've wanted to quit for one reason or another. And I think like that 2 year window maybe helped us like understand how to know when it is time to let go, but until then to just keep moving forward.
Hmm. So he used that season to kind of grow your ability, your staying power in Detroit or in the current ministry God's got you.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think a question I would love to ask you, Josh. We have pastors who listen to this podcast. We have church planters, replanters, revitalizers, chaplains, lay leaders. In every one of those roles, ministry gets hard. And when it gets hard, I feel like the easiest thing to do is quit. You have a tenacity, and I appreciate this about you. Even when the Lord released you from London, it's like, what now? You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't quitting ministry, it was just redirected. What would you say to a ministry leader who right now, door shuts in their face, maybe their spiritual rhythms are off, they just like, they just want to quit? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest answer I think to give is don't quit. Even though it's the hardest thing for that person to do.
Right.
But I think like, if you look through scripture, like who had it easy, and of all the people that God called, who just like was called and then immediately stepped into their calling, like
Yeah.
pretty much nobody, right?
Yeah.
Like even Paul had a season, we find it in Galatians, where he was basically like kind of removed and hidden before he came back to the council that he wanted to plant. Obviously, Jesus didn't really start ministry till he was 30. Joseph was, decades in prison and all this stuff. David was anointed and then long period of time, Moses, et cetera, et cetera. So I think like those times of not seeing the result you hoped for are the times of God developing you. And God using the circumstances of life to refine your character so that you are able to handle what he does want to give you eventually and the dream he has put in your heart.
That's
but
good.
you can't see the fulfillment of that dream if you quit. And I think like just don't give up. Like, it's the Winston Churchill thing, like just never surrender. And unless like, if God clearly tells you it's time to let it go, then you got to let it go. But until then, I would just keep moving forward.
Yeah, brother, I think what's interesting is like, go to London, 2 years, like go to Detroit a year after launch, COVID. Like your church planting journey has had so many off ramps and you still did it. And I think that's glory to God. But like, I do think for church planters, ministry leaders in general, I think that like quitting is the easiest way. But like, you guys have baptized people and people have gotten saved and you guys are doing good ministry. And that happened because you stayed on the path. I don't know if I would have. You're more spiritual than me. But
Well, I think you see, we've seen this in our church planting journey. Richard, you've seen this in your church planting journey. On the other side of those challenges and discouragements and roadblocks that you got to push through is almost always the most fruitful seasons of ministry.
yeah,
Every time we've had issues, and I just go. I could go through a list over the 8 years of our planting journey where there's a roadblock, and I think, by the way, I think you see this in the book of Acts. Well, every time there's conflict and roadblocks, the church on the other side of that, through prayer, through unity, through sometimes removal of people, like, is a greater fruitfulness and effectiveness. And so sometimes, and again, there's the wisdom in knowing, like, when am I in the wrong lane and when am I in the wrong place and where am I going the wrong direction? And I think counsel and scripture and your spiritual posture before God to say it's his open-handedness. But I do think there's wisdom in saying, if I push through this, there's fruit on the other side, or I just think that tenacity is so helpful.
I was thinking of Exodus. You have the moment where they're standing at the Red Sea. And Jewish culture, the sea was scary. It's deep. Like a Jew reading that story, the idea of walking through a sea is incredible. chaos and fear and darkness, and like God provided a path, and on the other side of the sea was like the promise of the Lord. I think oftentimes for us at Canvas, even in our moments where we've like had these terrifying, chaotic, like nothing's working out, on the other side, two things: God always makes a way, and two, I think when he makes a way, it's better. I was just thinking, about a year ago, we got told on a Thursday, hey, you have like 1 weekend left in our building. We pack a U-Haul, we do 3 prayer gatherings, and then like 45 days later, we're sitting now in like a $10 million building that we were given. And that's like if you told me that Thursday though, like this is going to be good, it's going to be all good, I would have hit you. But now looking back, I can see how God was faithful through the chaos. And if I had quit that Thursday at that phone call, we wouldn't be here. So.
Well, and I want to loop back to something, Josh, you said a really long time ago. I didn't want to cut you off. You said that like sometimes we view these roadblocks as like either punishment from God or or like I'm doing it wrong. Like, oh, and I've talked to a lot of our church leaders like that. It's like, ministry is hard right now. Maybe I shouldn't be in ministry, or this ministry is not going well. Maybe I should stop doing this ministry. And we view these signs not as challenges to overcome, but as these almost, or these hardships as signs that we should stop, not necessarily challenges to overcome. So what would your encouragement be to a ministry leader? And it's kind of similar to what Richard asked, but like if a ministry leader it's just not clicking, or there's whatever various roadblock, like what would you do to encourage them in this moment, or say to encourage them?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I just wanted to point back to something I feel like is important.
Oh, sure.
And it kind of relates to this as well. But when you're like in these moments of struggle and questioning and challenge, like I think like that clear confidence in the call that you have been given, like is really critical. Because like when London fell through and we weren't going to go there, we did have a time of like, okay, God, like, do you still want us to church plant? If so, where? And some friends of ours who meant well, pastors were like, hey, like, just make sure you're called. They're like, because church planting is suicide. That's what they told us. Church planting is suicide. And where I was like, okay, well, let's just make sure. So Emma and I spent some time, like we spent a day fasting and praying. I remember that next day I woke up, I opened up her Bible for some reason, which I always read usually on my phone. Maybe that makes me less spiritual, but like I opened up her physical Bible that morning. I went to the next passage I was reading. It was in Isaiah. And the verses I read were, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, hey, children or barren woman who has had no children, like rejoice, because your children are going to be more than the woman who's already, had kids. And then it says your kids are going to inhabit the desolate places and the nations.
Yeah.
And at that point, like I had friends who were in that residency program with me who had already started their churches. We tried to start one and it wasn't working. It felt like we were a barren, like we couldn't have kids. And the Lord just spoke to me through that. And next to those verses in my wife's Bible, she had written church planting. And like, I was like, it was that moment of like, okay, God is speaking here. And that was something to hold on to for when times did get rough. And, we weren't sure if we should keep going. So to answer your question about like, you're feeling discouraged and you're wondering, I do think it's totally fine to have questions and be like, Ed, I'm not sure about this. I just think it's about processing that with the right people.
Yeah.
Like not processing it with like, the people in your life who are going to be like, yeah, like it is hard. Maybe we should quit, but like going to people even like yourselves who've kind of been through some seasons, who know what it's like, letting them speak life into you and not just making decisions like in a silo, but like with trusted people who are going to give counsel, and obviously praying and seeking the Lord. I think it's okay. I heard Louis Giglio say this once. He said him and Shelley quit all the time, but they just make it short. They're like, they quit on a Monday and then Tuesday they just go back to work.
Gotcha.
And so like, I think giving yourself like the time to be like, hey, this sucks, I quit,
Wow.
and then like the next day, like, okay, I'm going to go back, like those short moments of reprieve, like, I think that's fine. Like, don't make your decisions in the worst moment.
Yeah.
Like, give yourself the time to get out of that fog so you can see clearly and then start making some decisions.
I know I think I shared this story in one of our previous episodes, but it was a couple years ago. Like we had done all this outreach to try to like get people to our Easter services. Like we were like, we hadn't grown. We were just like, we were churches go through stale periods. Like it had been like a year, I felt like, since we hadn't really seen a lot of visitors, hadn't really seen people get baptized. Like it was just like the well or the faucet was shut. And I was just, and I was both spiritual, like we're just going to keep being faithful, we're going to trust God. But also I was getting mad, like, because I'm like, come on, I'm doing all this work. And we had punched so much effort into this Easter service and trying to get people there, inviting friends. Like I had personally invited 150 people to come to Easter, and we had Easter service, and it was like one of our low attended Sundays, and like it was like nobody. The heat was off in the school, so it was like 30 degrees in the gym we were meeting at. And
oh my God.
I'm putting my guitar on to help lead worship, and my wife walks up to ask me a question. I'm like, I think we should shut this thing down, and I think she looked at me and like, of course, I don't remember exactly what she said, but she's like, stop being a baby. And it just makes like, stop whining. You're fine. Don't be dramatic. What's interesting though but I had to kind of have that like quit moment.
Yeah.
Right.
And then honestly, like a couple weeks later, that's when God started moving in our church again.
Yeah.
It's like, I had to kind of I feel like there's a desperation in saying, I'm willing to quit.
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't mean to make this about my story, but I think that's important to say.
When is this episode coming out?
Sometime in November.
Great. I can say this. It'll be over by then. So like right now in our church, we're on the back end of a lot of growth, which is super cool. But in all that growth, we started struggling with member connection and engagement. Like when you go from 100 members, like 170 members in 6 months. And that's been like a real hurt for our leadership. Yeah. And we have members who have become less connected. Majority of our people are healthy. Like our church is fine. But for the last 3 months, I've been super disenfranchised and angry and frustrated. And I couldn't figure out why. And then 2 weeks ago, I had the lowest Sunday we've ever had in this building. And I went upstairs and I wrote down everybody who wasn't in our church. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, I was like, whoa, okay, we had 60 weekly attenders who are here every week that weren't here at the same time. That will never happen. That's fine. They'll be here next week. But then there was 25 people who've become less connected. They're not showing up as often. And it was in that moment, I had this scales falling from my eyes. Oh, our system of member engagement isn't working anymore. That's why I've been so frustrated. That has been the thing. I think sometimes what's so interesting to me is that the Lord will use those frustrating pits of hell, sucky moments. And I say it to say, I got off the stage. I can say this because it'll be 2 months away from what had happened. I got off stage from preaching and I go out the front door. We have 2 entrances, old school church building. It's kind of 1,000 doors. And I walk out and I normally stand out there and greet people. And I was standing there, they're taking communion, about to dismiss the service, right? And I'm just standing there. And I'm to hell with it. And I just walk upstairs, go to my office and lock the door and turn the lights off because I'm so discouraged, man. We were doing so much outreach and we had a horrible Sunday. And I was like, where the hell is everybody? And I just start writing down names. In that moment, if you asked me if I was willing to apply to some random church job in Oklahoma City, I'd have been yes, I would love to apply. Totally. I think there's a thing about leaning in when it's easier to lean out. There's something about those moments. I love the Lou Giglio thing. I've heard that before, Josh. Quit, but when you come back with a little more tenacity, a little more fire. If you come back and you do the same thing you did the day before, what Einstein say? Same thing again and again is insanity. So I think sometimes God will use those low moments. I just thought of this to actually change our perspective. Maybe I can't see the problem from up here. So God needs to humble me. God needs to bring me down. Because for me, our worst attended Sunday, literally, I went to our pastors. We had an emergency elders meeting. I'm like, guys, we suck. This is why we suck. Here's the problem. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, how did we miss this? And it's well, we had to have a bad Sunday to notice that.
Yeah. Well, Josh, you said this early on, that God is developing you in these seasons to be the person you need to do with the skills that you need to have for the next season. Hey, Josh, before we kind of wrap this thing up officially, I know we talked a lot about the wanting to quit, but like, just tell us some of the awesome things God's done when you said yes to Detroit and when you opened the doors to go to Detroit.
Well, let me tell you something. So my daughter is she is sick
Hi.
from school, but her name is London. So which means house of worship. And this is obviously one of the best things that has happened in Detroit because we didn't have any kids when we moved here. And God's blessed us with with 3 kids now and a family and a church, and we have a house. It's like, all these things that God just gave us as we kept moving forward. I feel like if you don't quit, you win.
Yeah, come on.
And I think sometimes we think that what we're looking for is X amount of people in the church or even X amount of baptisms or X amount of whatever. And I think God's looking for faithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hey, are you going to keep going forward when you don't feel like it? When you would rather find someplace else or find something else to do. And if you don't quit, you win. Because I remember I heard this before, people overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year and they underestimate what they can accomplish in 10. And faithfulness compounds over time, and it's like compound interest. Eventually you're going to see the return on investment, but sometimes it just takes longer. And
Wow.
I feel like at the stage that we're at in Detroit, having been around for 7 years, in some ways I'm like a veteran. Obviously I'm not compared to people who've been here for decades, but when it comes to new churches and stuff, I'm kind of like a veteran at this point. And you have this credibility, you have this this well kind of to draw from that you just get from not quitting, So moving forward and being faithful, that is going to ultimately lead to even more fruit in the long term. Because we're not looking just for flash, right? We're looking for fruit. And you can't really develop fruit unless you're faithful. It takes time.
Yeah.
The long-term result of your obedience is going to totally be worth it. Just quickly, Abraham and Isaac, right? God's you're going to have more
Josh.
than the stars of the sky.
Yeah.
Well, Abraham has 1 kid. That looks like a failure, right? Compared to the dream that God gave him. But that 1 kid would have 2 kids, would have 12 kids, would have thousands of kids, would have 1 million people in the wilderness, and become a nation through which all the nations on the earth were blessed. So just don't give up.
The quote for this week, when Haley posts the social media for this week.
Yeah, you heard it.
Fruit, not flash.
Yep.
That was hot, Josh. I
man.
feel like I would have punched a wall.
Yeah, the last 2 minutes were awesome. Yeah, I love what you said. Yeah, there's just stuff that happens when you don't quit.
Yeah.
So good. Well, hey, thanks for jumping on this podcast with us and telling your story and celebrating what God has done through the different weaves of being faithfulness. So, well, hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Ministry Mix podcast. If you found today's discussion helpful, we'd encourage you to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you could, take a minute and leave a review because your feedback helps push this to other leaders just like you. And we'd encourage you to join our newly formed Facebook communities and groups. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, so if you enjoy these episodes, and if you don't enjoy them but want to listen to them again, we have Facebook groups and also a Group Me. The Facebook group has extra content, and the Group Me has different conversations related to different things in ministry and church, like a youth pastors group and a kids ministry group. We'd love to have you join. You can find the link in our bio at ministry.mix on Instagram.
I love it. See you guys next time.
Bye.